Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And I'm so excited to introduce today's program, How Do We Celebrate a Cultural History of Hanukkah? Joining us today are Dr. Jenna Joselit, Marjorie Ingall, and Stephanie Butnick. Dr. Joselit is the Charles E. Smith Professor of Judaic Studies and Professor of History at George Washington University. She is an author, most recently of Set in Stone, America's Embrace of the Ten Commandments, and is also a Tablet magazine columnist. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Republic, Gastronomica, and the Forward. Marjorie Ingall is the author of Mamaleh Knows Best, What Jewish Mothers Do to Raise Successful, Creative, Empathetic, Independent Children, and the co-author of Make It Right, The Case for Good Apologies, coming in 2022. She often writes about children's books for the New York Times Book Review and has written for many other magazines and newspapers, including Tablet and the Forward, Self, Glamour, Town and Country, New York, Ms., Red Book, Wired, Harper's Bazaar, Real Simple, and Sassy. Stephanie Butnick, who will be serving as our moderator, is the deputy editor of Tablet magazine and one of the hosts of Unorthodox, a podcast that focuses on Jewish news and culture. She also oversees Tablet's podcast network, Tablet Studios. Stephanie is one of the co-authors of the newish Jewish encyclopedia, From Abraham to Zabars and Everything in Between. During the discussion, please feel free to share questions in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can during the hour. This program is being recorded, and the video will be available tomorrow on the museum's YouTube channel. So thank you all again for being here, and I'm now going to hand things over to Stephanie and our panelists.
Sydney, thank you so much for that introduction and for having me along with these two illustrious panelists today for what's sure to be a fascinating conversation. I like to think of myself as the shamash today, the helper, the candle that will light your candles, allow the two of these, my co-interlocutors, these panelists to shine because they are really, truly brilliant. And when I think about holidays and Jewish culture in America, you two are actually like the people I want to talk to about this stuff. So I'm very excited that we can have this conversation for all the attendees here. And you can write questions for Jenna or Marjorie in the Q&A box. And I'm gonna be looking at them throughout. We'll have some time for them towards the end. So if anything comes up that you want to ask, just pop it in the chat box. And great, so it's Hanukkah. Jenna, you're the historian. Tell us sort of how we got here. It's 2020, whatever year it is, 2021 in America. Hanukkah is a huge deal. Everyone gathers and lights the candles. Everyone does the presents. I mean, can you sort of track us? How did we get here? Was Hanukkah always like this? Was it always such a big deal?
No. So Hanukkah, as we American Jews know it, is really a 20th century phenomenon. And it's only grown in circumference rather than shrink like so many other Jewish rituals. And there are as many reasons for its cultural heft as there are candles. And I was really tempted in the spirit of the holiday to write a jingle, to give Adam Sandler a run for his money, but I didn't get too far with that. So instead I've created a little list, which I'm going to run through, if that's okay.
Will you check it twice before you do it?
No.
Or that's a different holiday, I'm sorry.
Different holiday. So you ready, everybody? So here are my 8 reasons for Hanukkah's large presence in contemporary American Jewish life. 1 is accident of timing. 2, its embrace of consumerism. 3, the child-centeredness of American culture and of American Jewish culture writ large, especially in the aftermath of World War II. 4, the rise of the State of Israel. 3 cheers. 5, affability. It doesn't demand too much of its participants. It doesn't ask for any great show of cultural literacy or ritual proficiency. It's kind of easy peasy. 6, it's a grassroots phenomenon. It's not mandated from the top down. We don't hear all sorts of exhortations to light the candles. It's something that people seem to do willy-nilly. 7, it's kind of layered. There are different opportunities. You could make as much or as little of it as you want. And 8, and I think 8 is really the key here. It's all about affect. It's all about feeling good about being Jewish. And it sort of sits well on one's shoulders or on one's window ledge, quite literally. So I think, any one of these 8 could be mixed and matched, much as we mix and match our Hanukkah. But I think, putting it all together, and I'm sure our listeners can adduce other reasons. These are my top 8 reasons for why it's grown larger, So what do you think? Makes sense, Marjorie?
I like that. By the way, I wrote those down because I do believe there will be a quiz at the end of this, right? Who can remember all 8? Yeah, Marjorie, what is that? Does that sound right to you?
I was going to say that was so good. I feel like we're done. Nice to see everybody. Bye. Thank you for coming. Yes.
8-minute long event.
Yes, that works for me. I also think that as we Jews have become more and more, as we think of ourselves less and less as immigrants and more as Americans, and what Jenna alluded to about our child-centric culture, the notion of being left out has become so horrifying to, particularly I think, to parents worrying that their children are not feeling centered in whatever narrative is currently happening. But I think in general, I think we live in a sort of what about me culture. And, it has made a very minor holiday get, we had a metaphor already. I'm going to go for another one. Puffed up like a lovely sufganiyah floating in oil.
So like the jelly at the center would be like the core of the holiday, and then like the sugary excess is.
But I think we would argue about what the jelly is. Like, what is the core of this holiday? You could, this is probably more Jenna's field than mine, but what exactly is Hanukkah? What theoretically are we celebrating?
Right. So there are all sorts of theories about that, and some actually not quite so pleasant if you dig deep enough. But what's fascinating is how somewhere along the line it got transmogrified into something that's friendly and child-centered and pleasant and domestic and all bound up with family. But if you think about the story that is at the heart, it's really kind of about fragmentation and fighting over the truth and whose notion of community will prevail. And it's about resistance and resilience. It's very weighty at its heart, which perhaps might explain why it languished for a while. It's a very difficult holiday, actually. And so how miraculously within the context of America, it got puffed up, as you say, it got prettified, daintified. I don't know, to respond to Janine's comment, whether it's a matter of being assimilated or not assimilated. It's just part and parcel of the process by which Jewishness and Judaism becomes modernized or postmodernized.
I mean, I do feel like there's an interesting opportunity to talk about it as a to be assimilated or not to be assimilated holiday. This is based on this notion of the Maccabees, this small band of people. The way it is simplified for children's books is they fought against the bad Assyrian Greeks, and they were this mighty little band, and the bad people destroyed the temple. And then we get into the miracle part, which is a different, we get out of, because this is historically based. This is not in the Torah. This is a late holiday. I, as somebody who went to Orthodox day school until 8th grade, I'm constantly finding out, I'm fascinated to find out what we have history for. And this is one of those holidays where we have a lot of history. We also have, Jews fighting against other Jews, the people who were assimilationist versus those who weren't, and who might have possibly, usurped leadership roles that they shouldn't have had. You have this total, as Jenna used, I like the word fragmentation. There's a lot of ugly and there's Jews killing other Jews in this story.
Right. But we lose sight of that, happily. And instead,
we've chosen to make it la Santa Claus holiday.
Right. But that says something about us. It says something about the plasticity of tradition. It says something about our openness to the larger environment. Again, whether you want to call that assimilationist or openness to the larger environment. I mean, if you step back and you really think long and hard, it's really remarkable that here we are, wherever we are, Stephanie, 2021, celebrating something that happened eons ago, millennia ago, and having this conversation about its relevance and whether it's a buoyant holiday or a sobering holiday. I mean, there's something quite, without sounding unduly rabbinic or Pollyannish, something quite remarkable, I think, about that. And that speaks, I think, to the jelly at the heart, which is its resilience in a different way. It's adaptability. Sometimes, of course, as I'm sure we'll discuss, the adaptability bends too far in the wrong direction. But when, what was the word we used the other day? Undergirded sufficiently, perhaps it bends in quite the right direction. And I'll kind of leave it there for the time being.
Yeah,
You know,
I see an anonymous question about, does it celebrate freedom of religion? I like that as a narrative, but I think that is arguable about whether that's what actually the holiday was about, because you have some people, you had people who viewed their Judaism differently, and those who were more acculturated, and those who were more isolationist, and you could argue fundamentalist. So I think that the fact that there are so many possible interpretations is really interesting, and the fact we do have an opportunity, I think, here to talk about how this holiday can mean so many different things to so many different people if we choose to look at this combination of history and culture and social history, that it's all really interesting.
You know, Jenna, one of your 8 candlesticks of wisdom, your tabors of wisdom, was this accident of timing, that because it was so generally closely aligned with Christmas, it sort of blew up into this bigger thing. That's really interesting, because this year, you know, we're almost done with Hanukkah. The Christmas music has started, but Christmas is actually not for another few weeks. And so how did we, I think this, I want to say that this year is different from, as they, you know, all other years. I think people are contemplating Hanukkah almost in a different way, because we have like a tiny gasp of air before we go fully into Christmas, right? Like the lights are starting to go up, but we were sort of able, and at least in my experience, to have Hanukkah on its own and to sort of decouple it from the larger Christmas narrative. And I think that to me was a relief. Like we could sort of all take a moment in this larger moment where I think a lot of Jews are taking stock of their own Judaism, right? What do they want to be doing within the post-pan? I think starting with that first Passover, this will be a question at some point, by the way, I'm just giving my theory. Starting with the first Passover of the pandemic, 2020, I think people started making that idea of grassroots. People said, you know, I'm not going to the Seder I've gone to every year of my life. I'm not going to Bubby's house. I'm not going to the place I always go. What do I want to make of this? And so now we're 2 Hanukkahs in, and also Hanukkah separate from Christmas. So, I mean, what do you think we are considering differently this year, now that we're out of the shadow? Yeah, Marjorie, please.
One thing I really love about Judaism is the fact that it is such a home-based religion that, you know, while certainly rabbis and religious leaders are very important, so much of what we do as Jews can be done at home without without a boss figure. And I just remember after, you know, Passover of pandemic number 1, I was really weepy and sad about not being able to have the Passover that I wanted to have. I think already by Hanukkah, I was starting to see like, okay, this is the new normal. But also Hanukkah tends to be this cozy, more candlelit thing at home. I never was, you know, maybe because I wasn't a big dater, I never did the matzah ball, you know, I never did the big Hanukkah party kind of a thing. And hunkering down at home with children, you know, I think the pandemic made us even more hearth-based, you know, than we ever were before. And I think as a lot of us were making our sourdough bread and stuff like that, we were experimenting in the kitchen more and more. And that has been a nice thing for Hanukkah, like that Also, you know, our lives are pretty much in front of a screen. So being able to Google other cultures, you know, what do they fry as opposed to just latkes and sufganiot, and can we try, you know, a Greek dessert? Can we? And I feel like it has been, I don't want to romanticize too much, but it does feel like a little bit of a golden, glowy, candlelit, nice thing. Maybe also because we're sort of seeing a way out of the pandemic. I don't know.
Nice. Now, I also think that the pandemic made us realize the value of things that we might not have otherwise considered. That also sounds kind of sappy and sentimental, but I think just the season and that the realization of what's at stake in both a positive and a negative sense has impacted us profoundly. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, which is the recrudescence, the stunning recrudescence of anti-Semitism, which makes us hunker down in other ways and take stock in other ways. So I think the combo is really kind of the concatenation, to use a $50 word, of these forces really has made Hanukkah loom a little larger. It is, I agree with you, Stephanie, enjoying more breathing room at the moment because it is untethered from its big brother, which is Christmas. So there's more opportunity to look at it on its own terms. And then there's also the political sphere where you have the second, I hate that term, but the vice presidential family publicly laying claim to their identity and having a Hanukkah to-do at the White House and making a lot of noise about how important this is to them as a family and as a country and as a nation and on and on and on. So I think the confluence of all these factors makes Hanukkah kind of stand a little taller on its own 8 legs and not constantly have to answer to Christmas, as you wrote in that wonderful Wash Post piece about how it's so important for Hanukkah to feel that it's Hanukkah, that it has an integrity, a vitality, an arsenal, a repertoire all of its own, and it doesn't need constantly to borrow from the external world or from a larger world to stand tall.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think this year, I mean, so that was this op-ed that me and my 2 Unorthodox podcast co-hosts wrote, which I think was titled like, "Don't call it Jewish Christmas." Like, don't bring Hanukkah. Uh-oh, I froze. I'm sorry, guys.
No, you're working for me.
Oh, okay. I just had a blip. The Hanukkah miracle. Our Wi-Fi. What is it? Our Wi-Fi made it through all 8. I don't know. You know, I think this year there is a push against like, stop trying to make this Jewish Christmas. And I've been seeing it a lot of places. I think one of the ways we've been seeing it is in this aversion. There was a piece in the New York Times about like the bad Hanukkah merch. Like you go into Walmart and you see like the Oi to the World pillow and the love, live, laugh, latkes things. And there's sort of people who are saying, we don't want this. Actually, the point of Hanukkah, I mean, you talked about this before, Jenna, the point of Hanukkah was a fight against assimilation. And so to suddenly be seeing like wreaths in blue and white, that sort of feels, I think it feels a little wrong to people. And this year, for some reason, I think it's that confluence of identity and culture, like all these things that are happening at a moment and everyone's saying, wait, actually I don't necessarily know that I want that. Or I want that to be how Hanukkah is perceived. I mean, that's why we're here talking today, right? Trying to investigate what it is that makes Hanukkah unique.
Or that what makes it unique for us. I went back and took a look at some, the equivalent of how to be Jewish guidebooks and manuals from the early 20th century. And there they jumped through hoops, trying so hard to essentially Christianize Hanukkah and to make it clear that it has, I actually came across quotes that spoke of Hanukkah in terms of mirth and cheer, which are not exactly two concepts or two words that usually spring to one's lips. They should, no reason not, but they don't.
About Judaism in general, not just
in general. Okay, thank you.
We don't know from mirth.
We don't know from mirth. We know from humor and sarcasm, but not from mirth. Maybe we ought to. But in any event, the point was that the vocabulary and the activities that were being that the readers of these household how to be Jewish guides were being exposed to was all about the symmetry between, or the ways in which Hanukkah lent itself to being a kind of Jewish Christmas. And so here we are 100 years later pushing back against that and trying to argue in some instances, for the integrity of this holiday on its own terms and for its strange qualities. I know that Marjorie and I have spoken, and Marjorie certainly has written a lot about the countercultural, the oppositional nature of Judaism, and how it doesn't quite have to march in lockstep, and that's kind of the beauty of it all. And perhaps now that's moving from being largely a rhetorical gesture into something that's really being performed and acted on. That this culture speaks on its own terms. It doesn't need all these helping hands, and that there's enough going on internally for it to be as engaging as it possibly could be. I also think, and I'd love to know your response to this, we're living in a very, or we had, curious to find this out in a couple of years' time, but my sense is that for a number of years, we're living in a kind of post-denominational Jewish world, where there's a lot of picking and choosing, and that things that once defined someone as Orthodox is now open to somebody who is not, and there's a lot of cross-pollination. And so Hanukkah really seems to me to be the perfect post-denominational holiday or occasion, because it lends itself to so many different kinds of opportunities, iterations. You can go really deep, you can go shallow, you can do this, you can do that. And so there's a kind of latitude towards in Hanukkah that at least we now accentuate, that speaks to this flexible post-denominational, I'll choose a little from here, I'll choose a little from there moment. What do you think about that? Is that putting too fine a point on it, do you think?
No. I also think, it's a reflection of our capitalist society that, I think about as somebody who writes a lot about Jewish children's literature, how there are two subjects that appear, well, now I would say three subjects that appear over and over and over again in Jewish children's books, mostly picture books. Holocaust, Hanukkah, and now Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I yearn for books about other Jewish holidays, but December is when people buy presents, which makes it interesting. This one, it feels almost lovely that it came earlier this year, that we didn't have to. I have a lot of sympathy for parents of small children, parents of children who go to diverse public schools, parents who are in interfaith relationships. How do you, it's not just Hanukkah, but how do you, you have to teach children to accept not being the majority culture. I shouldn't say have to. My choice would be, we don't get the Hanukkah bush. We don't get the wreath of the blue and white balls. But it's Hanukkah is not Christmas. And when people say, have kids enjoy what Hanukkah is, yes, to a degree, but I also think it's okay for to let kids feel sad about being left out, and we don't have a culture that lets children feel sad and sit with negative feelings. And I think that is an important thing to learn as an adult. And there can be pride in, okay, I'm not like everybody else. But there's a book that I love that a lot of Jewish librarians and critics don't love, a picture book called Dear Santa, Love Rachel Rosenstein, which is about a little Jewish girl who keeps wanting Santa to come to her house and keeps wanting to put out cookies and her parents are like, nope, we don't have Santa. And she keeps thinking that if she just works hard enough, she can get Santa to come. And her parents do exactly what they're supposed to do, which is like, we have lots of cool stuff too. But it's realistic for kids to maybe feel a little bad. And at the end of the book, what she does is she goes out for Chinese food, and her Muslim friends from school and her Hindu friends from school are also in the same restaurant. And it's nice and it's fun, but there's this tiny hint of, but it's not Christmas. And I think that is such a good message, deal with it. It's good. It's okay. And yeah, of course, we can also, I mean, dreidel is awesome. You know, getting to light candles when you're a little kid, you know, using that as an opportunity to do the first time, which is the plot of the new All of a Kind family picture book, which I wanted to hate and do not think it's great. I think it's wonderful about little Gertie and her desire to be a big kid. That is things that children wrestle with. It has this real feeling of authenticity as opposed to the Pollyannaism you mentioned earlier. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Can we talk, like, that book is by Amanda Peet, right?
Yeah.
Jewish actress Amanda Peet.
Yep, Jewish actress Amanda Peet, who also produced that awesome The Chair, the thing about academia, and the
Did you really?
and it's based on an incident that happened at Friends School, which she attended.
There you go.
Fun trivia.
I do think, though, there is, I mean, Hanukkah is it's like a child-centric holiday in a lot of ways, right? A lot of people's, you know, talking about material culture, a lot of families' menorahs are the ones that you made in, like, you know, you make them in Hebrew school and you keep them your whole life. I mean, there's something very child-friendly about the holiday, right? It's as you said, Marjorie, it's home-based. You don't have to, I'm sure there are ways to incorporate synagogue, shul going, but it's you have some food, you light the candles, you put it in the window, or, you know, I think that there's something really easy and palatable about it.
Which explains why it's taken hold. That was I forget which number on my trusty little list, but that's why.
Affability, right?
Affability or ease or access. And it's not something that requires a huge amount of knowledge to maneuver around. You know, how hard is it? It's not terribly hard. That's not to say that the holiday would not gain in complexity if people were to pay a little bit more attention to its historicity or to some other dimensions, or delve into a particular text about Hanukkah. You know, that would be fine too, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So whatever it presents, it presents well. And it is, you know, I hate to say this, but it is what it is, and that's the joy of it. You know, in many of my writings, particularly for tablet, I've always made a case for the humble and the kind of sweet and delimited, and I think in a way that's kind of what Marjorie, you're getting at, to couching it more in emotional terms, but being Jewish is different, and it has a different range of emotions, different set of responsibilities, different treasures, different goodies, and that's just fine. That is as it ought to be, and that sometimes when we try so hard to make it into something that it's not, we kind of lose sight of that which it is. And so for me, the sweetness and the simplicity, or the seeming simplicity, it's just, you know, 8 candles and a lumpy kind of thing that some kid made in Hebrew school. Maybe I'm just getting old at this point, and these things tend to have a larger resonance, perhaps also because of the pandemic and the loss of life and everything else that goes along with that constriction. But I just think there's something valuable in what it is, and that efforts to make it into more than the sum of its parts are almost doomed to fail because they don't quite sit right.
Yeah, someone mentioned
my speech.
Someone said earlier in the chat something about even hearing as a child Christian families talking about the over commercialization of Christmas. And I think that's true. But I also think that the, you know, not talking about the birth of Jesus is a way to still have, you know, a shopping oriented capitalist holiday that is, you know, it's sort of, you know, well, if it's Santa, he's non-denominational, it's just good cheer. It's a holiday celebrating, you know, what do we say besides good cheer? I can't think of what the other, you know, words.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Yeah.
Merry. Well, it's because we wrote all those songs for Christmas that have nothing to do with anything religious.
Exactly. And the fact that Jews wrote so many, I mean, that's something that Jenna can speak to, but the huge history of Jews writing Hanukkah songs in
Easter songs
in Tin Pan Alley, where a tablet is. I did want to share just a little anecdote about my kids, I really sweated whether to send my kids to day school or not. And I did wind up sending them to public school. And I had a lot of angst and agita about it early on. But one of the worst moments was a kid in my daughter Josie's kindergarten saying, "You're Jewish? I thought you were normal."
Oh.
And not meaning it as an insult, just like, "Oh, you're so alien." And then the next year, her absolutely lovely teacher sent home a note saying, "Would it be okay if we read the Polar Express in class?" Which is a beautifully illustrated Chris Van Allsburg children's book that also became a crappy movie, but a really beautiful book. But it has Santa. And he's like, "It's not really Christian because it's just Santa. It's not like anything about Christianity." And I wrote, and a Muslim parent wrote saying, "We're not comfortable." But Josie cried when I told her that I was writing this note because she wanted to be normal. She was like, "Why are you calling attention to me?" So I thought,
What'd you say? How did you get out of that one?
I didn't get out of it. I said, "I understand that this is really hard for you, but we live in a country that theoretically values the separation of church and state. And I would be perfectly happy if there were, because Josie was all like, 'Well, why aren't there menorahs in my class?' And I'd be like, I'd be happy if there were no symbols at all in your class." And, I think you kind of got to go with the ever-present, "They'll understand better when you're older."
Right.
So Jenna, could you walk us through, how we got to, so this is Edith here, and we just heard from about Marjorie's children. How did we get to this place? Can you walk us through sort of how, you had a great piece about this in Tablet Magazine, which Sydney can hopefully drop in the chat. Basically, how did we get could you just walk us through some of the more specifics of Hanukkah in America, historically, if you don't mind?
Didn't I do that with my 8 tidy little things?
You absolutely
yes,
did.
but we want more. We want messiness.
It's all messy.
Like bringing your baby on a Zoom.
Yeah, in between, it's all messy.
We want real.
Look, I think there are a lot of stakeholders and actors. There's the public school, there's politicians, there's the marketplace. I think probably the marketplace plays the heftiest part, which reminds me, I wanted just to respond by way of a digression to Marjorie's comment that Christmas also underwent a huge metamorphosis in this country. Christmas too has become something that people in the mid-19th century would never quite have envisioned it becoming. And so all holidays, all rituals lend themselves to these processes of commercialization and reinterpretation. It just seems sometimes to be a little bit more acute in the case of minority religions. So, I think that there are all these cultural custodians involved who are pressing home the message of holiday celebration and how it's become a way to express one's fidelity to America, one's sense of promise and bounty. I mean, it's really hard to disentangle one factor to another, but there's clearly cultural pressure to render Christmas larger than the sum of its 12 nights and concomitantly to try and get Hanukkah to measure up. And whether it's the public schools, whether it's writers like Grace Paley, I'm always reminded and love every year to read her story, The Loudest Voice, in which a Jewish kid, Shirley, is asked to play Jesus, not because of any ameliorist efforts, but because she has the loudest voice in the class. She's a belter, and her parents, her immigrant parents, are absolutely flummoxed, maybe a little bit pleased at this too, but don't quite know how to respond to this compliment. They're not quite sure it's a compliment, and the story doesn't quite resolve, which is the point. These things don't quite neatly resolve, but they're
I love not neatly resolving. I think we seek that as human beings, and we seek that as Jews, and I think that that's an absolutely, that liminal place of is a really fine place to be, and has honestly served us well as Jews through all of history, being in this place to question and being in a religion that has frequently been a dialogic religion and frequently been the 2 Jews, 3 synagogues religion. I think that is healthy for all of us, and the respect of difference is, I think, a really important thing. One thing, as you were talking, one thing I absolutely love about your work is you often look at America through contemporary historical sources that are off. I don't want to say this in a dismissive way, but sometimes are beneath other people's notice, like women's fashion stuff. And one of the things I love is you look at food. And you mentioned in that piece that was put up the thing about that horrible mid-century menorah recipe. And I think it's
candlelight salad or menorah salad, or those bite-sized Maccabees. I write that sentence and then I cringe afterwards. I think, what is it about the miniaturization of the mighty Maccabees? What's going on there? And that we could actually eat them. But then I'm reminded that we could eat Santa Claus too, and gingerbread thing. There's something about consuming culture, as the anthropologists
literally
understand. There's just something fun. And to get back to Stephanie's question and a roundabout way to respond to you, Marjorie, I think that one of the things that makes the study of American Jewry so much fun, so challenging, is precisely that, the ingredient of fun rather than responsibility. And if I had to choose like one trajectory that runs throughout as a kind of a counter narrative, it's the efforts on the part of the grassroots, largely women, housewives, who are not quite as lettered as they ought to have been. Now that's changed, but back in the day, they didn't have that many opportunities. They had no opportunities for cultural literacy, and so they relied a lot on the domestic arts and the role of gesture to put things forth. And what they promoted was the idea of Jewishness as fun, which isn't exactly a concept that lives comfortably given our history. And somehow I think there's a sea change with America, that America also places a premium on fun and on pleasure and bounty and abundance. I know I'm grunching in a lot of things here, but I think that's the point, that there's an effort to transform Judaism into something that's weighty and heavy and full of responsibility, into something that's lifts the spirits and that could be pleasurable and lighthearted. And that's kind of a 180-degree turn. Whether that's good for the Jews or bad for the Jews, I'll leave that for another panel to reckon with. But it seems to me that if we were to kind of reduce Hanukkah to its very essence, it's about fun and food. Yes, food. I
think one, we are in an era of being a little bit more aware of difference and celebratory of difference. Certainly in children's books, which I'm particularly interested in, there's a whole We Need Diverse Books movement, which one might argue has not been quite as embracing of Jews as it should be. Regardless, I think that we are in a position, I'm seeing in Jewish children's literature, so much more awareness of Sephardic stories, of Mizrahi stories. And certainly when, Wayne asked a question in the chat about food in general, I love that people are seeking to move beyond Ashkenazi recipes. And Wayne also asked about what do we think of these, newfangled latkes? And it's funny because I have very hostile feelings towards newfangled hummus. I do not agree with chocolate hummus. I think it is an abomination unto the Lord. But I shared a picture on my little video on my Facebook the other day of saying that everybody loves Joe Nathan's curried sweet potato latkes, which is true. And we saw my cat stealing one off of the platter and eating it. So I am fine. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. One, it's not a tradition. Latkes is just and I say lucky, and my children make fun of me because they're New York children and I'm a Boston person, and Boston people.
Yeah, where does latke come from? I feel like if you're from like Chicago, there's like a Midwestern-ish thing where latke, the Food Network star Molly Yeh says latke on her show. And people are like, where does that come from? But I love it.
I'm not sure.
You know, there was a time people would call challah chali.
My elderly relatives say chali.
Right.
But I am okay. You know, the holiday is about frying things. It's about the oil. Like that's the tradition, you know, it's not, I mean, it's not a law, it's tradition, but just put anything in oil. I'm good with that. I love the oil. And it's not offensive. Like, you know, chocolate hummus, just call it pudding. Screw you people. What's going on?
Sort of. But back to the miniature Maccabees and tuna fish and all these foods. I mean, you know, tuna fish as a Maccabee, I don't know, it's quite of a stretch, but fun. Or cottage cheese and banana and maraschino cherries.
I love that sort of, you can look at these Hadassah cookbooks and Shul cookbooks through, you know, starting from the, you know, I think some of the earliest ones are
1880s, 1870s.
And you really see our relationship with the larger culture reflected. You know, I found the sort of a lot of these Southern cookbooks hilarious because they're synagogue cookbooks and they're full of pork recipes, because, you know, that was their, you know, values. And then everything was Hawaiian, which, you know, basically put a pineapple on it. Anyway.
But we digress.
What's the role of rabbis in all this? We've talked about consumerism. We've talked about the mashup of big, like, there must have been rabbis who were saying, you know, let's get the Hanukkah song and the Christmas pageant.
I don't know about that. There are rabbis saying, let's get the Hanukkah menorah lit, boys and girls. You know, I think there is a moment in time where it kind of gets honored in the breach rather than the observance. And I found in my travels lots of fancy rabbis, you know, largely in the Grand Reform temples, exhorting their congregants to, one quote, light Hanukkah candles anew, O modern Israelites, you know, that kind of lofty rhetoric, which suggests that they're not, or that they don't have the ritual paraphernalia, or it somehow lost its luster. And then with the arrival of Eastern European Jews, Hanukkah becomes something that they carry with, but it's not a major deal. So, you know, putting it all together, we owe a great thanks to America, because it's in America that Hanukkah really comes into its own as a major moment on the Jewish calendar, maybe for the wrong reasons, but it does come into its own in every single aspect, whether it's gastronomic or it's gift giving or it's playful. And that says something. I'm not quite sure what, but it says something.
I wanted to answer one of the questions about you know, someone saying that I'm saying don't allow anything in classrooms, and I'm not saying that. Don't allow religious symbols. What I am saying is, you know, there's a term hidden curriculum, which is the stuff that we learn that isn't explicit in school. And I want discussion. I want, you know, what that teacher who I loved ended up doing was having my mom come in to talk about Hanukkah, have Kieran's mom come in to talk about Muslim traditions. And, you know, when my kids were little and they would come home with Christmas coloring sheets, I hated that because there was no, you know, we are people who talk and who question. And I don't want just decorations, I want conversations.
Nice. That's a really good sentence and a wonderful sentiment. Really sentiment. We don't want decoration. It should be our motto going forward.
Yes.
Latter-day Maccabees. We don't want decoration. We want conversation. There you go.
Although I also loved. I mean, you and I both also love decoration and fashion and all that. And your look at sort of the evolving Hanukkah is so interesting, and how, you know, you sort of had these kitschy, you know, Jewish ones, like supposed to look like ancient treasures from the Holy Land. And then you had these mid-century gorgeousnesses. And I think it's so funny because I was just in the Jonathan Adler flagship store on the Upper East Side, and his mid-century menorahs are just gloriously gorgeous. And I feel like, you watch fashion happen through what the menorahs look like. You could probably look at a menorah and say, I know when this was made.
Right, and what it signified. So, what we now take to be the kitschy and kind of like insufferably, that patinated greenware was really thought to be the all the rage and quite, oh, hi, beautiful baby. Oh, there went beautiful baby.
Hi, baby.
Bring her back.
Hello, baby.
This is hers.
No, this is our Jonathan Adler menorah. And my favorite thing about it is that you almost wouldn't, it's very obviously a menorah, but it's also this beautiful item. I have several Hanukkah out on my shelf right now. And I think that's part of the conversation, right? And this is beautiful. This is a beautiful object. And I think, Jenna, we've had you on Unorthodox to talk about sort of the brassy, what we think of when we think of Judaica. And I think that the menorah in Hanukkah, that's such an interesting way to track. Could you actually talk a little bit about that piece and sort of walk
I'm going to just finish that sentence. It's an interesting way to track changes and positionality, and so the popularity of the patinated greenware, which we now find a little bit cringe-inducing, was a way to kind of shore up one's relationship to Israel. And it was both modern and it's also seemingly old, copper being a material that was associated with some kind of biblical provenance. So it seemed to dance at all sorts of weddings, both modernity and antiquity. And then you had the chromium stuff, which I just recently wrote about. That's what you've been talking about. So chromium was a kind of faux silver that was inexpensive and never tarnished and always gleamed, or so we were told. And that lent itself to more sleek and modern forms. And then you have the tin stuff from the Jewish Museum, which reflected the economics. People couldn't afford, most Eastern European Jews could not afford something that was made out of silver, and the other chromium wasn't a gleam in anyone's eye at the time. So they would work with what they had, which was tin or lead. So that reflects a particular economic position. Now you have George Jensen Minorot, and you have Jonathan Adler. So we're in a different relationship in terms of our affluence and our heightened sense of aesthetics and tastefulness. So all of this can be tracked along the spine of the Hanukkah. It would make for a really great exhibit. And I'm thinking too of the extraordinary Hanukkah that are in the Jewish Museum's collections that are the handiwork of a wide range of audiences that at times defy anybody to kind of immediately identify them as a Hanukkah, but that's the point. They're made out of rubber, they're made out of all sorts of materials. And that too underscores, I think, what is really at the heart of this holiday, and that its plasticity and its adaptability and the way it lends itself to not only lively discussion, but to animated decoration as well.
And
yes,
so, oh yes. Could I jump in? Because there is a great question someone who's asking, if Hanukkah is a fight against assimilation, what do you think of the drive-through Hanukkah light show in Cincinnati, which I've actually never heard of, but I imagine is
what is that? Oh my God.
Well, there's always do you know from this, Marjorie?
No, but my first reaction is, oh my God, I want to see.
Because it's I feel like you usually know the street in the town to go that has the great, there's sort of every city, every town has the place to go for the really good Christmas lights. What I'm guessing is that Cincinnati has some kind of great analog of blue and white lights. And I think this is interesting. I have a colleague who has a big Hanukkah inflatable situation on her front lawn because she's like, why can't I have this? Why should my kids not get this, what their neighbors have for Christmas? So I think that there is something kind of amazing about this. So I'm curious, where do you stand on blue and white lights? Marjorie, please.
It's so funny. One of the most interesting, before we leave, I did want to have the opportunity to recommend some children's picture books about Hanukkah, but a new one just published this month is called Red and Green and Blue and White. And it is about a street that is all decorated for Christmas. And one family has a menorah in the window and some kind of blue and white decoration. And someone throws a brick. And it's about the little boy feeling anxious about, he doesn't know if he wants to show a menorah anymore or have any blue and white anymore. And his Christian friend across the street puts up a little sign that says for Isaac. And I forget if she put if they put something else in the window, but I thought it was such an interesting look at what it means to grow up in a multicultural street. And I do have this feeling of fondness when I walk around in Diker Heights, which is the place here that has the absolutely, exuberant, shall we say, Christmas lights, that there's always some Hanukkah, there's always like 2 Hanukkah houses, and it's really interesting. And I feel like asking me to say, is it good or bad is reductive. My kids, what we did was we never had any Hanukkah, Christmassy merch, but we could go to friends' houses and eat their cookies and help them decorate their tree. I feel like, saying, tell me this is bad is not necessarily helpful.
Fair enough.
Okay. So, so Jenna, what do you think? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and the books
then we'll
that
go
I
back
love,
to the books.
the books that I absolutely love, the number one best Hanukkah book that will ever exist in the history of the universe, as I've written in tablet multiple times, is Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins by Eric Kimmel, which is a made up folktale. It is terrifying. It has amazing art. It is so weird and interesting, and it is about community, and it is a real adventurous storytelling, because kids deserve good art as well. And children's literature should not be just didactic. My other favorite is, honestly, this All the Kind Family Hanukkah is so good, and I so was cranky about them, about Sidney Taylor's estate allowing them to do All the Kind Family picture book. How dare they? What kind of chutzpah is that? They did an amazing, amazing, amazing job. What else do I really like? I feel like we often settle for crappy art for kids, and we shouldn't have to do that. You could go through a lot of my previous tablet columns about what Jewish children's books I think are great. I don't think, give me more books about other holidays. Again, with the home-based religion, let's have a lot more excellent Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, and Sukkot.
How about Tu B'Shvat? Let's hear it for Tu B'Shvat.
We actually have some good Tu B'Shvat books because of the interest in environmentalism that people have now, that there's been a raft of actually oddly board books for little kids. There are a bunch of good Tu B'Shvat board books.
Jenna, blue and white lights, good or bad?
What?
Blue
Marjorie,
and white lights,
I
good or
don't do that. I don't do that. I just kind of try and take the measure of it and reckon with it and try and figure out what it tells us. And I leave it to the rabbis and the sociologists to pronounce. I like to pronounce historically rather than coterminously, because I don't know. I say all the time that I'm really a whiz at predicting the past. I don't have any particular skill when it comes to predicting the present, and I stand by that. I think if you were to ask me if I were around in the 50s or 60s to comment on what was coming down the pike, I would have been absolutely flabbergasted. Now it's part of our communal property, so you just never know what's coming down the pike and how to interpret it, and that which seems rather outre turns out to be rather routine at a certain point in time. Let's just say that Jewishness is always in flux and changing and adaptable, and 3 cheers, or what's the equivalent of 3 cheers? Is there a Hanukkah cheer that we can
18.
offer? What?
Oh, 8 or 18.
Whatever you want. Hey Dodd or something in favor of that
A few shofar blasts.
Changeability and integrity. So Marjorie had conversation and or minimum of declaration. Let's hear it for conversation. So I'm all for plasticity, adaptability, and a little jelly of historicity at the center.
Love it.
And so since we are approaching, the last evenings of Hanukkah. Do either of you have a favorite ritual or custom or tradition that you do for Hanukkah that you look forward to each year, or a new one you took on this year?
I polished the Hanukkah, which I haven't done in a long time. We have a very beautiful silver Hanukkah that was part of my husband's family that's come down through the ages, and it's very splendid. It's like the most splendidy. It's not me at all in terms of my taste, but I love the historicity of it, and I love that it's come down through the ages, and I love that it's our job collectively, because it's quite a huge thing to figure out how to polish it each year. So that was my great contribution. I don't know.
I like that. And did you have enough, did you start with just a little bit of polish and then you
No. We were
wouldn't make it?
anticipating. We were anticipating. So he went online and he bought like 18 different kinds of silver polish, and we've been trying different things to.
Oh, you have to give us a recommendation.
Okay, there are lots, and then we had to buy like a tub to be able to put the thing in the tub, and so we were very involved in the.
Yeah, I like science. I like experiments. Good.
Yeah, it was very chemistry oriented.
Yeah.
You know.
My favorite ritual is always the raft of social media discussion that always happens about how best to clean off the wax.
But
Always
if you use
fun.
if you use oil, you don't have that problem.
Right.
So
But if you have cats, they will set themselves on fire.
Didn't think of that. The other ritual we have is like we do a kind of comparison of different kinds of latkes.
Yes.
A latke festival of sorts. We've so run out of steam at this
We used
point.
our air fryer for the first time this year because there was a piece in the Nosher, I believe, part of my Jewish learning about this is what the air fryer was born for. It was really good. You could make a good, it took some trial and error to figure out, cooking time and heat.
But you still had to grate all the potatoes, no?
My younger kid is in an ethnobotany class, and they talked about cooking in one of the things and what is a traditional recipe. And so I talked about latkes, and usually I use the food processor.
Whoa.
And because I told the family stories, I had to do the thing about it doesn't taste good unless there's a little bit of knuckle in it. And so I freaking grated. But then when it came time to do the sweet potato latkes, I used the machine.
I mean, the hand grating versus food processor, it's its own full event, a full Zoom event.
So instead of next year in Jerusalem, we'll come back to the museum and we'll discuss the merits of technology, and
we'll debate that Talmudically. I will say that I have a new favorite ritual, which is that I have a newborn who I think showed up on this Zoom because she was supposed to be sleeping during this, but decided she wanted to be part of the conversation. So you may have seen the top of her head as I tried to keep her out of frame. We lit the candles together, and I have to say that there was something really, really beautiful about this generation, this Lador Vador, this whole thing that we do. And Carol has a really nice comment in the chat. She says, with each candle we light, we make a dedication. This is for love, another for family, etc. So that's what she does. Each candle is for, they sort of have an intention, as we say now, with each candle. And I think there is something beautiful. And I think that what this year shows is like there's always something new to consider about Hanukkah. And I'm grateful to the two of you, Marjorie Ingall, Jenna Joselit, for being here with us tonight as we, round out a wonderful Hanukkah season, not a holiday season, Hanukkah season. And I wanted to thank Sydney for having us as part of the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was such a great conversation to listen to. You all are amazing. And thank you all so much to everybody who joined us. Everything we do at the museum is made possible through donor support. To those of you watching, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum or becoming a member and joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can check out in the link in the Zoom chat. Also, as a special Hanukkah gift, you are all invited to attend our Object Spotlight program tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom, and you can find that link in the Zoom chat as well. Have a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye all.